Cool. What up, my nerds? Today we're going to be making some fake mud really cheap. So I've had a few people message me about what I'm using for basing material on most of my miniatures. And the answer is pretty simple. It's tea, coffee and sand.
Sounds disgusting.
So I'm going to show you how to mix it all together and in what quantities. I'm also going to show you how to apply it using the two methods that I've used before. Without further ado, let's go. So one of the things you're going to need is a measuring beaker. I've marked here the 3 levels that I tend to use. That's 10, 20 and 40 milliliters of each. You're going to need something to put it all in at the end. You're going to need super cheap instant coffee and equally cheap tea bags. So when it comes to making the mix, I always have this thing ready. One of these paint funnels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the end off of this and then funnel into the container at the end. And then put that to one side for now. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in some tea. And to do this, what we do is chop the ends of the tea bags off and slowly put it into the pot. There we go, that's dead on 14 ml now with the tea bags, and that is up to the level on here. So what I'm going to do now is just pour it straight into the pot. Now we'll use the coffee. Instant coffee in this mix lasts for a really long time because you need very little. So I'll be using the tiniest amount of this today. There you go, just up to the line. And the reason that we use a small amount is because this is the largest particle size in this mix. So this acts as rocks. You don't want to have loads and loads of rocks in normal mud. And now the last bit is actually optional, depending on if you want to put sand in, because this is the only bit that would cost you probably a bit more money, unless you buy a mass bulk for, I don't know, something like lizards or something. So I just put a tiny amount in. There you go, about that much. And that is the standard mix of the basing material. So now all you need to do is shake it up. And that's a good mix of all different sizes. So it's all mixed up. Let's put a small amount in here. So the first option I'm going to show you is what I use on larger based items. I have an example. Here's one that I made earlier. True Blue Peter fashion. So I use this particular basing method when I'm doing a large surface like this. For an example purposes, we're just going to use a standard 40mm base and some basing material. And then the other thing to add in is some cheap craft PVA. Just put a fair dollop in, just enough so it's covering half the stuff inside. And then you want to get yourself a coffee stirrer or something to mix it with, and just give it a quick mix and get it so that it starts to clump around the stick. Now you want to get some water. I'm using a load of DI water at the moment, but you can just use tap water. Put maybe a tablespoon's worth in first, give it a mix. And what you want to do is you want to reach a point where it's not clumping on the stick quite as much, and you can see the coloration is starting to bleed out inside the pot. And when you're at that point, that is when you can start to scoop it down onto your base or whatever you're using it for. This is why I do it on a larger base only as well. It goes on quite thick, so it works really well when you're trying to build up a big base and maybe you've put some cork down, you're trying to get contours to look like they flow into each other. But for small bases, I tend to stay away from it. Another thing is, because you're using PVA, the PVA will grip to MDF better than plastic, but that's an example of what it looks like when wet. But that's option 1, so that's PVA. But this is the one step above using just PVA. So you can use PVA and paint, or you can use Mod Podge and paint like I've got here. And the reason I've done this is so that what I can do is mix it straight in with the basing material, and straight away I know that I'm going to have a rough colour match for when I paint my basing colour. So if you wanted to do some large scenics which matched in with the colour of your army, if you're using particular paint, you can mix it in with PVA glue or Mod Podge. Most of the pigmentation on this is actually coming from the paint that we've mixed into the solution. They're kind of the same option, but I wanted to show both because they're both quite useful to know, especially when you're doing a large piece and you want to save a lot of time because you have a short deadline. Now the final option is to actually use super glue with this solution, and this is the way that I've actually done it for most of my Space Marine army. So what I do with this is I have a sacrificial teaspoon. I let it fall off on purpose, but it means I can get a nice thin coverage on the base and then just soak it in super glue. As a warning, this will create toxic fumes that you should not be breathing in. But what you do is you just slowly drip super glue over the base, making sure that every single bit of that basing material goes the darker colour. Don't slather it, because if you put too much on, you'll start to get a lot of smoke, and on top of that, it will go hard with a smooth surface. So you want to be very careful when doing this. And there we go, we've got a little bit of smoke coming off of it. So this is what I mean when I say toxic fumes and slightly too much. But if you just leave it for a minute, it will settle. So that is completely dry now and ready for paint straight away. There are some small bits on it on the edge. To get those out, you just need to use a file. As you can see, there are small areas where the super glue on this one has dried in a clear, smooth mound. In this circumstance, what I would do is I would paint the whole thing using my basing material colour of Rhinox hide, and then I'd highlight those smooth areas in a grey and use those as rocks. But it doesn't always happen, and I'll show you an example where it hasn't. So this miniature here has had the same treatment with the basing material, as you can tell, and there are no clear super glue marks. I must have been a little bit overzealous with this one. Now that it's on there, what I tend to do is lock in the basing with a little thin layer of PVA or Mod Podge anyway, and that's to stop any of the pigment bleed through onto the snow that I've been using. And I've got an example of where it hasn't been locked in here. And the outcome from this is really spectacular for what it is. It's incredibly cheap basing material compared to what you can buy online, and it actually takes a lot less time to go from being applied to dry to be able to paint it straight away. So there we go, simple, cheap, mud, asphalt, whatever you want to have a texture like that. You can also use the option of not putting in the sand to save money, and you can also not put in the coffee and just use tea, and then you've got a very fine grit. It just depends on your application. But these three things alone are all that I use now. They're far easier than anything else and far cheaper. Don't forget to follow me on all the social media, hit that like and subscribe button, and also the bell icon. There'll be a lot more of these videos coming up soon. See you later, my nerds.